Tonight, the webinar, of course, is under the topic of Does Christianity have a future under Labor? And this is a very vital topic, as we'll see in one moment. Our guest, of course, will be Senator the Honourable Kristina Keneally, and I will actually introduce her more formally in a few moments. If I may, just want to introduce my colleague, David De Lima, who's our South Australian Northern Territory Director. David will help me with the webinar, and he will be filtering the Q&A questions, and we encourage you to type in your questions once the Senator has finished her presentation and I've finished the questioning, so there'll be plenty of time for you to ask questions. And of course, I'm the National Webinar host and also the New South Wales State Director. If I may, just close your eyes for a moment, Senator, but on Wednesday I have a special conversation with the Attorney General, Senator Honourable Michaelia Cash, and we're going to be talking about the Religious Freedom Bill, as we will be tonight, Senator, as well, very quickly. So please, if you're on board, make sure you register for that event. It's at 2 p.m. Sydney time, and we're going to be talking about the Religious Discrimination Bill. Okay, if I may, can I just also make it clear for everybody that FamilyVoice Australia is a national Christian-based non-denominational organisation advocating on family, faith and freedom issues of concern. And just recently, I must tell you, we were outside New South Wales Parliament House with a rally against the Voluntary Assisted Dying Bill. And there I was very privileged to join forces with the Presbyterians, the Catholics, the Anglicans, and it was very encouraging to see us all come together on a united front. Okay, if I may, very quickly, let me just sort of highlight what we're going to be talking about tonight. And very quickly, of course, our guest speaker is the Senator Honourable Kristina Keneally. And if I may, I will introduce her now just very quickly. I believe, Senator, you were born in Las Vegas, Nevada. Wow, how exciting is that? And I have to tell you, you've won me on one particular point of view, because you're a Rabbitohs supporter. Well, so am I, because I was very instrumental in getting Rabbitohs back into the league some many years ago. So thank you very much for being a Rabbitohs supporter. You're on your way to a winner there. Also, now look, I have to tell you, on the 4th of December 2009, you were sworn in as the 42nd Premier of New South Wales, but more importantly, you were the first female Premier for New South Wales. And of course, another Labor colleague of yours, Dr. Carmen Lawrence, was the first Premier of Western Australia, and indeed the first Premier in Australia. And that's something to be noted. And of course, you assumed your senatorial role on the 14th of February 2018. So we look forward to talking to you. If I may share a couple of things with you before you address the webinar participants tonight. I read in the Catholic News some years ago about Kristina Keneally, a very public Catholic. We're going to be talking about that, where you struggled with your faith, just very quickly. I also note that this is more important and more topical. Labor says it's ready to work with the government on religious freedom laws, and you are going to be engaged very closely on this particular topic. And then, if I may, I had a look at the Alp National Platform from 2021, and of a document, I must say, that was 149 pages long. There are a number of paragraphs devoted to religion, 3 only out of 149 pages, but that's all right. So I'm going to be talking about that as well. So just sort of bring that to your attention. Well, look, let's stop sharing. And what I'd like to do is, Senator, if you could just open up your presentation, say a few words. Now, for everybody that doesn't know, I've got Chris Owens, who's the advisor to the Senator. Chris may or may not be involved in the conversation. It's up to the Senator, but welcome, Chris. Delighted to have you on board, and just feel free to engage as and when necessary. Over to you, Senator, and welcome, and thank you for accepting our invitation. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Greg and David and everyone who's joining us tonight, and for the very warm welcome. It's a terrific opportunity for us to have a conversation And as we begin, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we're all meeting and pay respects to elders past and present and any who are joining us this evening. And I acknowledge the deep spiritual link that Aboriginal people have to creation and thank them for custodianship of country. I also acknowledge all of the religious and faith community leaders joining us tonight. During the pandemic, many of you had to adapt and adopt new ways of caring for your communities in really difficult times, and I thank you for that. Tonight, you've asked me to speak with you about the relationship between politics and religion in Australia, and specifically the relationship between Labor as the alternative government and the Christian community. Now, this is fertile ground for me and a conversation I welcome. As Deputy Labor Leader in the Senate and a senior frontbencher, I bring to my role my background and my training. My background as a lifelong Christian and Catholic, as a trained theologian, and as a former Catholic school teacher and Catholic youth worker. Indeed, I'm looking forward to your questions and our conversation shortly. While I understand we will explore in more depth Labor's policies and our positions in relation to social issues, and also, yes, of course, Greg, the religious discrimination bill. Now, you've also asked me to address in these opening remarks Labor's approach to the upcoming election, and I thank you for that, because the specific conversations we're about to have are best understood in a wider context. And Labor, under our leader, Anthony Albanese, looks forward to the next federal election. In 2022, Australians can choose to go forward under a Labor government with ambition, with vision, and with a plan for economic recovery that draws upon our country's values. Those values of creating opportunity, rewarding hard work, holding no one back, and leaving no one behind. Now, we have an opportunity to come together as a country in 2022 and to build a better future together. And the pandemic has taught us that those values of connectivity, of community, of solidarity, of caring for one another, they're the values that sought us through the pandemic, and they're the values upon which we will rely to build that better future. Now, since Federation, Australia has been a united continent, and indeed, it's a unique gift that we have. We stand alone in the world, having a continent all to ourselves, and that unity has been a strength for our nation. Yet during the pandemic, we have been challenged by the forces of division, whether driven by ideology or political opportunism. Now, it does sadden me to say that our Prime Minister, Mr. Morrison, has often chosen to play a game of dividing people, pitting states against one another, giving too much comfort to extremists who seek to undermine our democracy and our sense of national unity, or indeed dividing between the haves and the have-nots when it comes to things like JobKeeper and JobSeeker. In Anthony Albanese, Labor is offering a leader with a deep commitment to bringing people together. And Anthony knows the importance of solidarity and of social justice. These are values that are core to his identity. From his Catholic upbringing and education, he knows the importance of caring for the poor, feeding the hungry, caring for the sick, of valuing the inherent human dignity in all persons, in treating others as you would want to be treated. He understands, he values, and he upholds the common good. I've known Anthony for 20 years. His responsibility, his decency, and his integrity stand out. He builds consensus. He is the right person to bring this country together. What guides Anthony is an understanding that we must work together if we are to move forward as one. Now, elections are always about choices, and Australians can choose a Labor government that is alive to the opportunities of this moment and ready with a plan to seize it. A government that brings businesses and unions together for the common interest. A government where women are respected and safe in their homes and at work, and where they receive equal pay and opportunity. A government where families can rely on secure work to plan for the future. Now, Labor's plan embraces a better future as a better life for working families, secure Australian jobs, and a future made in Australia. I put to you that the alternative is another 3 years of division and inaction. To begin a second decade where family wages aren't keeping up with their bills, a second decade of attacks on Medicare and the NDIS, and a second decade of rorts, waste, and dishonesty. A government that is left with nothing but lies and scare campaigns. All of this is on the line in 2022. Now, Labor's plan for a better future. Well, what will it look like? Well, I hope, indeed I say, that when we reflect on the first term of an Albanese Labor government, what we will see is an economy where we make more things here in Australia, powered by cheap renewable energy, booming new industries employing Australians trained by TAFE and university, more Australian families with better job security, stronger Australian families, particularly with more affordable childcare and stronger Medicare, and a nation that has had the courage to take up the invitation to reconciliation through the statement from the heart. Now, these achievements will be driven by our values. And I understand later on, or shortly, we're about to discuss some of those policies and their offerings to, indeed, the Australian people and to Christian communities specifically. In anticipation, though, let me reflect a bit upon Labor values and indeed on my own. In doing so, I'm going to quote my inaugural speech in the New South Wales Parliament way back in 2003, where I reflected on the three motivations that drove me to politics in the first place and the reasons I joined the Australian Labor Party. And those three values that I outlined that night in May 2003, a passion for social justice, the importance of community, and living life with energy and enthusiasm. These values, I told the New South Wales Parliament all those years ago, have their roots in my Catholic faith and in its strong social justice tradition, including, and often starting with, the papal encyclical in 1891, Rerum Novarum, on the condition of the labor movement, and strong statements from the Vatican and from bishops on peace, the environment, and economic justice for all. These values also came from my Catholic parents, who instilled in me that to whom much is given, much is expected, that we are all responsible for the world in which we live, and that gifts and talents were meant to be shared, not hidden under a bushel basket. As I said then, these values drew me to the Australian Labor Party. These values keep me there. And I strongly believe that people of faith have a legitimate voice in the public square. Early on in my time in politics, the phrase, "she's the Catholic Labor MP," often fell out of media reporting, as if I had started some strange new faction within the Labor Party. But I argue this: human beings are physical and they are spiritual. And human beings bring their physical selves and their spiritual selves, however expressed, to their political conversations, and that this is not a threat to civil society. For thousands of years, the spiritual life of human beings has supported and encouraged the extension of human rights, the establishment of civic communities, the promulgation of the public good, and extraordinary acts of self-sacrifice for one's fellow citizens. We must acknowledge, however, that religious belief has had its dark civic moments too. Australia has had its own divisions: sectarianism between Catholics and Protestants, the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse, or that religiously motivated extremists have used terrorism and violence in the name of religious conviction. Yet in the face of these challenges, the Australian people have shown an ability to remain united with their fellow citizens. After the Lint Cafe siege, the "I'll Ride With You" campaign surfaced. Witness, as well, Islamic leaders and parents working with national security agencies to keep our community safe, or the Christian, Hindu, and Jewish communities, the Sikh communities, all extending charity and support throughout the pandemic, particularly to temporary visa holders. Now, no mainstream party or political figure argues that religion has no place in civic life. The Greens, for example, will struggle to become a more centrist party as long as large portions of their movement remain hostile to organized religion and people of faith. And no sensible solution to some of the most vexed societal questions whether on national security or religious discrimination or social issues that prompt conscience votes like euthanasia or mitochondrial donation, can be found. No solution to these can be found without understanding and respecting the religious dimension of human actions. Now, to serve in government is a great privilege, and I am fortunate to have known that privilege at a state level. And I know, and we all know, that the next election will be held in extraordinary times. We've had a pandemic, lockdowns, border closures, families separated. I myself suffered the loss of my father during this pandemic, unable to say goodbye to him in person and having to watch his funeral on Facebook from the other side of the globe. For many people, there have been significant and ongoing job losses, extraordinarily difficult economic times, and strong mental health challenges. Tragically, people have died. Communities have suffered, and Australians, as they look forward, want security, stability, and hope for a better future. Now, the policies that each side offers are important, but so too are the values that they bring. And Labor is determined to restore to our politics a sense of unity and a sense of responsibility, decency, and integrity. Leadership is about facing up to the problems and looking for solutions. It's also, though, about being accountable. It's about ensuring that that sacred trust in our democracy between voters and elected representatives is preserved and protected. Now, Anthony Albanese has also had this privilege of serving in government. But Anthony came to politics with no sense of destiny. He was raised in council housing by a single mom on a disability pension. His mom, Marianne, steeped him in three great faiths: the Catholic Church, the South Sydney Rabbitohs, and the Australian Labor Party. All she ever wanted for her son Anthony was a better life than the one she had, and she sacrificed greatly and suffered to make that happen. Anthony knows through his own personal life that government has the power to change lives: skills and education, secure jobs, decent healthcare, affordable housing. These things all made a difference in Anthony's life, and he knows the difference they can make in people seeking opportunity to get ahead. Anthony also knows from his time as Infrastructure and Transport Minister, as well as Leader of the House in a hung Parliament, that when you bring people together, transformative things can happen. When others promote division for personal political gain, Anthony strives for unity to deliver practical outcomes. Anthony and his team, of which I am proud to be a part, bring experience and compassion and the knowledge that sometimes people do need help to fulfill their potential, to grasp new opportunities, and to achieve a better life for themselves and their children. Government as a force for good, government as a support for the common good, leadership that unites. Now, Labor is asking Australians to choose a new direction for our country. And we are seeking renewal, not revolution, not a rejection of everything that has come before, but rather building a better future on those enduring values that have made Australia such a great country. A Labor government will reward people's hard work, and we will repay their trust. We seek to be a government that is worthy of the generosity of the Australian people. And we will hold ourselves to a higher standard of honesty and integrity. And one of the most significant commitments in this space is to establish a powerful, transparent, and independent National Anti-Corruption Commission. Now, I believe Labor has the right plans and policies for this moment. Secure jobs, better pay, fair conditions, and investment in skills and education. A better life for working families, stronger Medicare, cheaper childcare, and better aged care. And a future made in Australia, powered by more affordable renewable energy, manufacturing, and a proper national broadband network. We also seek a country that is at home with our identity, celebrating our diverse multicultural and faith communities, our arts and our music, and cherishing our institutions like the ABC and the SBS. And a country that, as I said, makes good on the statement, the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Now, that is Labor's vision for our country's future. Indeed, we could call this a country where we seek to bring good news to the poor and set the oppressed free, where we strengthen families, as the book of Proverbs says, by starting children off on the way that they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. And we recognize that creation proclaims the glory of God, and we are commanded to care for it. A nation united, a country where no one is held back and no one is left behind. That's what we are asking the people of Australia to vote for at the next election: a Labor government and a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristina. Wow, that sounded like a victory speech. But just before we go to the victory, if indeed, Senator, let me drill down further, and because you've made some wonderful comments and some also very challenging comments, and some comments that would no doubt perhaps raise some questions amongst the general 100,000 or so people that support us nationally. Let me drill down straight into it, if you don't mind, Senator. And if I can, I remember, I want to go back to 2019, Bill Shorten, leader of the Labor Party. I recall making a number of contacts with his office, even meeting with his chief of communications and asking him, can we engage with the Labor Party on policies? And the total response we got back was zero. As a result of your election in 2019, the Labor Party's internal report, as you're well aware of, concluded that Labor as a whole did not project an image that was appealing to devout Christians. How does Labor intend to engage with Christians in this forthcoming election, but not only in the election, thereafter, please, Senator, if you can clarify that sort of question for me.
Look, it's a really valid question, Greg, and I'm glad you've raised it, because really what I would point to is that Anthony will continue as he has begun. And indeed, since he has been leader since 2019, he has held several multi-faith roundtables and one-on-one meetings. And indeed, as a member of the leadership group, I have joined with him on several of those roundtables as we have sought to discuss the issues that are important to faith communities. Of course, the religious discrimination bill has shaped a great deal of that conversation, but indeed other issues around the provision of services, aged care in particular, around issues around caring for the environment, reducing economic inequality have also been part of that conversation. I would point to, for example, later this week on the 9th of December, Anthony and I and Chris Bowen, our Shadow Minister for Climate Change, will be holding Labor will be holding a Faith and Climate Summit, where Chris has invited faith leaders to come and speak with us about our plans for addressing the challenge of climate change and seeking that common ground where we can work together. So Anthony, as I said, has long had a strong respect for the role that religion plays in civic life and in his own personal life, and indeed the contribution that our diverse community groups make to the building up of Australia. And as I said, as I began this answer, he will continue as he goes on. He will continue as he has begun with ensuring that those voices play a significant part in the decisions government makes.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Well, obviously, Family Voice looks forward to being part of any engagement with the faith communities. That brings me to the next question, which I alluded to earlier. The Alp National Platform 2021, Senator. Can I read out just two little bits here, because it's very important to the question that's coming. And the heading in a 149-page document, there are about 3 paragraphs that say freedom of thought, conscience and religion. Number 45 says, Labor will protect and promote the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. 46 says, moreover, Labor believes in and supports the right of all Australians to have and to manifest their religion or beliefs, and the right of religious organisations to act in accordance with the doctrines, tenets, beliefs and teachings of their faith. That said, it's in print, black and white. Will Labor support the Religious Discrimination Bill?
Well, first of all, it's we don't have a final version of the bill. It's going through Senate inquiry and a parliamentary joint committee review on human rights. What we have said is that we will await the conclusion of those two inquiries before we will come down on a final position. But what we will do, and what we have done, is make clear the principles that will guide Labor's consideration of the bill. So I might speak to those first. And in doing so, say that with the greatest of respect, that the Prime Minister, having promised a bill in 2018, and then promising a bill in 2019, and then now here we are in 2021 with another iteration of the bill. Now, I'm not faulting the government for continuing to consult. I think it's important that they do. I've been part of those consultations. I've consulted with faith communities on this bill, and I do understand in previous iterations of the bill that faith communities and others in the community had objections to the legislation. Indeed, sometimes they had the same objections to the legislation. But as these bills now are before the Parliament and they go into these two committee inquiry processes, let me speak to those three principles that Labor will use to guide our consideration of the bill. One, and very much as you have just read out from our platform, and as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights makes clear, that religious organizations and people of faith have the right to act in accordance with the doctrines, beliefs, or teachings of their traditions and faith, and subject only to the limitations that are necessary to protect public safety, order, health, morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. So that international covenant we hold is important and will be one of the key principles that guides our consideration of the bill. We also support the extension of the federal anti-discrimination framework to ensure that Australians are not discriminated against because of their religious beliefs or activities, just as the law currently does prohibit discrimination on the basis of age, disability, race, sex, gender identity, sex characteristics, and orientations. And again, consistent with the International Covenant, the extension of the federal anti-discrimination framework in this way should not remove the protections that already exist in the law to protect Australians from other forms of discrimination. So those are the three principles that we have laid down and publicly made clear will guide our consideration of the bill. If I can say, Greg, and again, with the greatest of respect, because this is a difficult issue and I don't want it to become an object of division in the community. I don't want it to become a political football. I do not, what I do fear is that our opponents may seek to make this a political argument in an election context. And I don't think that serves religious communities. I don't think it serves the broader community. And I certainly don't think it serves the ends of good public policy making. There is a bipartisan position to be reached here. And what that is, if I could say, a fourth principle that guides us, that this is best done on a bipartisan basis for the whole of the community. And indeed, I would hope that the government, and indeed Minister Cash next week, outlines that they would like it to be a bipartisan process.
Okay, thank you, Senator. One last question before we go into the general questions. I will come back with some more later, but just one last one. It's going to be fairly specific, so I apologise up front. Senator, I want to get a job in a Muslim school. I'm a Christian. But the Muslim school says I can't be employed because I don't uphold their ethos and doctrine. Do they have a right to refuse me to work in their school?
I would say they do, in the sense that a religious school has the right to make clear what its mission and values are, and currently has that right to make decisions based on hiring people who can uphold those values. Now, I don't know enough about what Muslim schools may or may not seek in all the different types of positions they hire for. But I have had it put. Let me move to an example I can speak more clearly to. I was a school teacher in a Catholic school. My mother was a school teacher in a Catholic school, and indeed my children and my husband attended Catholic schools. And I have had it put to me by some people that only religion teachers in religious schools need to be of the religious faith. Why does a math teacher need to share the religious values of the school? Why does the woman who works in the front office, or the man who who works in the cafeteria or the garden, why do those people need to share the religious faith? And what I know from my life and from my experiences is that, and my understanding of Catholic schools is that there is it's an ecosystem. It's a community of faith and values. And whether it's the sports coach that leads prayers before you go out onto the basketball court, whether it's the homeroom teacher that has to take, or the classroom teacher that has to take children to the liturgy, whether it's staying after school to help supervise the sacramental preparation, all of those aspects, even the values that you live out and profess while you are interacting with people, all of those things are inherent in the job. And so one of the issues that I would say that I think this the parliamentary inquiries need to examine with the religious discrimination bill is this sense of what is inherent to the mission and the values of an institution, a religious institution, and how the religious institutions are able to preference people in employment who hold or engage in a particular religious belief or activity, provided that preference is in good faith and in accordance with a publicly available policy. Now, I can't tell you under this legislation how that really plays itself out in the detail of the question you've asked me. And so I think those are the types of questions that need to be examined by these parliamentary inquiries.
Thank you, Senator. It just seems to me that the issue of skills and employment could well be a litmus test in this election. But look, I'll come back to you on that. What I'd like to do is hand over to David for a couple of questions. I will come back. And David has been monitoring, and we've got heaps of questions that have come in. So we might finish by midnight. I'm not sure, Senator, but let's go to the question time from David. David, I hope you've got some appropriate questions there for the Senator. Thank you, David.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Senator Keneally, so much for that presentation. I particularly enjoyed those latter remarks that you made, drawing on your own experience as a teacher. And I can only echo that, having seen the groundsman in a Christian school really getting alongside misfit kids who didn't fit into the playground. And as he's trimming the roses, he's effectively providing pastoral care. So I think you're absolutely right, Senator, that the whole community is an echo chamber. I hadn't thought of that phrase in particular, but it's worth pondering on. I want to take you back to Greg's comment in relation to the loss of the federal election. It's been suggested that religion played a part in that, or ALP's position on religious freedom. Do you agree with that? And to what extent, if any, did matters of religious freedom play a part in the election loss?
So we did have a comprehensive election review, and it made a number of findings. And I think overwhelmingly, it found that the loss came down to a ambitious number of policies, and some of which were easily weaponized against us, and that we did not defend or explain them well enough. And also made some observations about the quality of the campaign. it did make the review did make some observations about a loss of votes, particularly amongst Christian communities. I'm not so sure that the specific issue of religious freedom played a role in that, as much as a more general impression that somehow Labor was not as welcoming to people of faith as our opponents. And if I can speak quite directly and personally, I openly disagreed with the Labor Party on this at the time. I was disappointed that Labor removed the conscience vote on the issue of same-sex marriage. And I publicly said so at the time, as did our leader, Anthony Albanese, because I felt that it sent a message that Labor no longer respected the views of people in the community that held a different position in good conscience on that issue. And it might be the case that you agreed or disagreed with that position, but my frustration and disappointment was that it sent a message that we were not receptive or welcoming place for people who held those views. And I find that disappointing because, as someone who has been engaged in the impolite conversation between religion and politics for many decades now, I often find there is so much more that unites a party like mine, the Australian Labor Party, and Christianity than divides us. The care for the poor, the commitment to reducing economic inequality, the care for the most vulnerable, the commitment, indeed the commandment from God to care for creation and the natural environment. I have had so many meetings over the years with religious groups, whether they're Baptists or Catholics or others, to discuss the provision of social services delivered by religious organizations. So that is my frustration, that perception was allowed to develop. And the work that Anthony and I and others have done has sought to make clear that the conversations like the ones we're having tonight are not only appropriate, they should have always been happening, and they should always be happening.
Good.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Another question: do all Catholics vote for the ALP?
Well, in fact, I wrote a whole paper on this at university.
Okay.
How long do we have? No, is the short answer. Yes, I wrote a whole paper starting back with the grouper movement and the split and examined that across the decades. But I will say the interesting thing I find, and I don't know if people have read Roy Williams' book, In God They Trust, which examines the religious faith of our prime ministers from Federation through to, I think he wrote it when Tony Abbott was prime minister. And it's really quite fascinating because it makes the observation and the point that in many ways, religious faith is not necessarily a predictor of either political success or what people will do in office. So the example of Julia Gillard, an atheist who was a supporter of the traditional definition of marriage, and then the Catholic Turnbull, who was not. So yes, I think perhaps the success of Catholicism, if I can put it in those terms, is that you will now find us in many political parties.
Thank you. You've mentioned the encyclical Rerum Novarum.
Mm-hmm.
Is it still the case that Roman Catholic social teaching is shaping the ALP or other Labor parties around the world?
I think it is. I think it is, and perhaps not as explicitly as it once was. But if I can put it in these terms, and again, we should be honest with each other that Catholic social teaching, while is not the province only of Catholicism. There are other Christian faiths who practice a form of and have a really strong emphasis on social teaching. And then there are other interpretations and traditions within Christianity that have a more individual focus on the individual relationship with God and with Jesus. But I might say this, that, and indeed I wrote an article about this in the quarterly essay as a response to one of their pieces, where I examined the notion of Catholic social teaching and Labour's campaign slogan in 2019, a fair go for all. And that sense of collectivism, of solidarity, of recognizing the inherent dignity in human beings and seeking to lift them up no matter where they came from. So the parable of the Good Samaritan, for example, I do see that that is a rich vein that does shape, I think, Australian society. And if I again can be direct, having moved here from the United States some 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I think it has been now. One of the things that startled me, having grown up in that culture, was that it was such an individualistic culture. And that sense of collectivism and fair go for all and solidarity that was evident in Australia, that was really lacking in the conversations in America, is something that stood out to me.
Okay, thank you, Senator. You've quoted tonight from Proverbs and from Psalms. Are those two books of scripture particularly valuable to you, or do you have a favorite book of the Bible that you find helpful?
So I must say, my thesis in my graduate degree was on the Book of Wisdom, and which is of course part of the Catholic Apocrypha books, and the figure of Sophia as a feminine interpretation of the divine. And I find the Book of Wisdom quite inspiring. I am a great fan of the Synoptic Gospels, though, less so John. I am more of a story narrative person. The Sermon on the Mount is perhaps and the Beatitudes are perhaps my favorite passages. And then I would have to also point to, as a child and indeed even as an adult, the Book of Ruth. And you might see just a theme emerging here, that I am drawn to some of the feminine aspects in the Bible and the feminine depictions of the divine, because, I think, I truly do believe that, in God, we are neither male nor female, Gentile nor Jew, servant or free, but all at one with God.
To follow up on the Book of Ruth, I've always been fascinated by the concept there of the Kinsmen Redeemer. And that's an ancient office, if you like. And would you comment on the value of that and how useful that might be to restore or to bring back or to import into our culture, where it seems to me, I see a homeless person on the street and I think, where is the family? Where is the Kinsman Redeemer in that context?
Yes, and that I think is something that we can reflect upon when we talk about, the challenges of aged care as well, and disability care. And it's not that family don't want to be part of that, but often families need help to be part of that. And I think one of the big challenges we are now facing is that sense of, generations like yours and mine, and perhaps for many people on this call, we are in a position where we have aging parents. We have either children who are either just starting out on their adult life or are still young themselves, or indeed we have grandchildren. And so we're in that kind of where there are care demands within our own families, at both ends of the spectrum. And within that, when you have more insecure work, when you have more challenges getting affordable childcare, when you have challenges finding aged care places or sufficient home care packages. So I do believe you are right to point to that family and supporting families and strengthening families, which is one of the things I talked about. Stronger Australian families is fundamental. Indeed, my colleague Marielle Smith wrote an essay this year, which started out with "the family is everything." She's a Labor senator from South Australia. She said, family is everything, and it's the building block upon which we build our society. But within that, and that's the point I went to in my speech, families do need support and help for those things to work.
Senator, I just want to go back to your earlier comment about your faith and that. As you recall in my introduction, I mentioned that there was an article in the Catholic News that you struggled with your faith. Can you expand on that for us, please? Because we'd be interested to learn, because we all struggle with our faith, but in particular, you're in politics and, the argument with church and state, which comes first. And how did you struggle with your faith, please, Senator? Because I'd be interested to know.
So first of all, I must confess, because it's good for the soul, I don't remember that Catholic Weekly.
Oh.
I don't know what I said.
I'll send it to you.
Thank you. However, there are two areas that spring to mind in terms of where I have struggled with my faith. And the first is after the loss of my stillborn daughter, Caroline. Because while I have a very strong belief and faith in God and belief that this earthly existence is not all there is, so I believe that my daughter is with God, she is in a source of love, and that I will be reunited with her in some way in future. When I leave this earthly realm, I was furious at the time. I was angry. Why is my daughter not with me? I don't necessarily believe in a interventionist God that points his or her hand down into our human existence and determines what happens. But I did really question, how could God not let my child stay with me? And I remember two things. One, a very clear sense on Holy Saturday night at the vigil, just a sense of peace descending on me. The vigil after she was born, the year after she was born, and kind of a sense of a comfort. And for people who've experienced real moments of grace, it's hard to describe, but it when you're in it. And that's what that was, that she was okay, that she was with me, but she was okay. But the second point in that was where I came to a realization that for all my intellectualizing about God is neither male nor female, and we all reflect, we're all created in the image and likeness of God. If I truly believe that's true, then God is a mother whose child has died. God's child became human and died. And God is a parent, understands my suffering. God did not intervene to stop God's own child from dying. And God understands that suffering. Now, that doesn't make it go away, and that doesn't make it right. But it made it more comforting. And it gave me a solace. Yeah. The second time I have very much struggled with my faith is when this scale and this scope of the institutional failure to deal with the child sexual abuse crisis in the Catholic Church. Now, I know other organizations and institutions, religious or not, have had this problem as well, but the scale of it and the absolute failure to recognize, as Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, because none are as precious as this." And really the upholding of the institution ahead of the lives of vulnerable people. I have really struggled with that, and I continue to struggle with it, because in as much as the church has done some good things in response, I still struggle in seeing that the institution has come to terms with that at a global scale. So, my faith is I understand that institutions are made up of human beings, and human beings are flawed. And yet the scale of that flaw I sometimes struggle to understand how an institution that is so flawed and allowed such evil to happen could also be a transmission of God's grace and sacraments. And that's a tension. If I'm honest, that is a tension that exists for me. But yet the Catholic Church and those institutions, those sacraments in particular, are important to me, and they're important to who I am, and it's important to my worldview. And I think, sometimes people say to me, well, why don't you just join another church? And while I've thought about that, to be blunt, I'm not sure I could give up being Catholic any more than I could give up, being a woman or being 53, although I wouldn't mind giving that up. It's about to happen to me in a few weeks' time.
Sure.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
part of who I am.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we had Layla Abdullah as our webinar guest a week ago, Senator, and she also said that she was, reflecting on her loss of her children, but as she said, they're in a better place now. David, let's go back to the questions from the people.
Yes, thank you, Senator, so much for sharing so personally just then. If I can follow that up, the Feast of the Innocents is coming up on the 28th of this month. The liturgical churches are aware of matters to do with the loss of life, I think, more than the Protestant churches. But in your work in relation to the Stillborn Association, do you think that the churches really need a bit of a shake-up in relation to helping not only women but married couples who've lost a child through stillbirth?
Well, one of the great comforts for me when my daughter died was that our parish priest, Father Greg McAnally, came to the hospital and he blessed Caroline, and he helped, she wasn't baptized in the sense that she wasn't born alive, but he blessed her and performed a ceremony and gave us a certificate to mark it, a naming certificate. And it really said to me that my faith community, my church, recognized my daughter as a person. And then another friend of ours who was a parish priest, is no more. Some of you may know him, Jared Moore. He did her funeral. Again, a Christian burial, and those things were really important to me. I think where the real failures, if I can use that term, lie is the way in which our society has seen this as a private tragedy, not as a public health problem, and has been unwilling to talk about it. And I get it. It's a terrible grief. It's awful. And nobody wants to think about it. But I think the experience of doing the Senate inquiry into stillbirth, so many parents, grandparents, parents who'd lost babies 40 years ago came forward and told their stories. And if we can talk about it, we can then do something about it. And, we can do something about it. We're already seeing a reduction in stillbirth in Victoria. The Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Canada, they've all had reductions in stillbirth. And there are some things that we can do in pregnancy care that will help avoid stillbirth. And I think it's the acknowledgement. And I have to say, really, truly, one of the few places I got that outward external acknowledgement and support, really from the social worker at the hospital and from the priest at my church.
Well, thank you, Senator. If I can take you back to your reflections on Lady Wisdom for a moment. I recall that in Proverbs we read that Lady Wisdom calls out in the streets. And I know you've had a background not only in politics, but also as a political commentator. But in both contexts, you're in the marketplace of ideas. How does your Christian faith inform the way that you handle that? It's often the case that people in politics or in the media can sometimes be quite bullying, to put it frankly. How does grace and wisdom inform your role in the public square?
Well, okay, so I do genuinely try to live by the two maxims of treat others as you would want to be treated, which I see as playing the ball, not the man or the woman, and that good old Catholic examination of conscience, which I seek to do regularly, nightly, to see if I can honestly say to myself, I have in my interactions with people, in my behaviors and in my words, have I done anything that I regret doing, that I ought not have done, or have I admitted doing things that I should have done? So those are the two principles I try to bring to my public interactions. Whether I'm successful will be for others to judge. I do kind of laugh when you ask that question, because I also have a slight reputation as being one of the more aggressive debaters in the parliament.
No.
It's, I often point out Jesus overturned the money changers in the temple. He was angry.
Righteous anger.
You have to. So, emotion plays a part.
Okay. All right, Senator, thank you, David. We're going to run out of time. Can I just say, Senator, you have just epitomised the value of the freedom of speech. We're not all going to agree with, I guess, everything that you've said. We certainly identify with your struggles and the view that you have. I mean, Labor Party does have an issue being founded by, I guess, the Catholic faith, but it's sort of moved away to more of a secular view in many ways. Mm-hmm. But look, it's so good that you're able to speak freely and openly, and we value that, because we do want to engage in debate in the public arena. But as I said, we're not all going to agree with everything you've said, but we certainly value the fact that you've shared that with us. David DeLima, I wonder if you could, and if you don't mind, we're going to close in prayer and pray for you and the Labor Party that there will be godly government as we enter the next election. Can I pass over to you, David? Then I'll just close the webinar. Thank you, David.
Yes, thank you, Greg. Senator, it's been an absolute delight to have heard you tonight. Allow me to pray for you. Our Father, we thank you for Senator Keneally and for the grace which you've poured out into her life. We thank you that she's been able to speak so freely, even about her own loss. And we are challenged, all of us, by what she's shared. So strengthen her, we pray, as she, like Lady Wisdom, calls out in the streets. And may your grace abound in her heart as she does that. Give her your wisdom, give her your courage, your discretion, and your love. We pray for the ALP, a party of rich Christian foundation, which in many ways has lost its way, as all parties do, as we all lose our way unless we are refreshed. So refresh the ALP, we pray. Refresh FamilyVoice, refresh our hearts and minds, all of our participants tonight, those who are participating and watching and listening. And when inevitably the ALP will win government again, we do pray that it will be a government which will enrich this nation. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, David. Senator Keneally, can I thank you on behalf of all our members nationally, our governing board, and on behalf of myself and David. You have been absolutely wonderful to make your time to come on board. We do want to hear what the future is for Christians under Labor, and I hope you'll engage with us as we get closer to the election, because we do want to make sure that our voice is heard as yours is too. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much, Senator. Thank you, David, and good night to you. And this will be recorded, everybody, and we'll make it available in about 2 or 3 days' time. Good night, everybody, and God bless.